So, of course, me being a painter, I make a mess like this all the time, and it's pretty hard to ignore. So people take notice, and one of those people who took notice was, of course, my wife. After all, sometimes she accuses me of paying more attention to my hobbies than to her. So one day we decided, why not include her in this? So that's what we're going to be doing today. I've set up a workplace, not for just one, but for two. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to find my wife and we're going to teach her a little bit about how to paint, using, of course, the wide, weird world of Malifaux. All right, Humblebrett.
I am ready.
What are you wearing?
I wanted to dress for the theme.
Well, okay. Now's as good a time as ever to do that.
Should be.
The tool of instruction for today is going to be a Terracotta Warrior from 2nd edition Malifaux. It's from the Ten Thunders faction. It's pretty cool, has a pretty versatile use on the tabletop, came into existence at about the time when true scale was in fashion, and it has the advantage of being pretty monocolored, so it's easy for beginners.
Alright, so I'm going to show you the basics to start off with, just your equipment that you're dealing with. So right here, that's your wet palette. That's where you're going to be smearing stuff, and it is soaked, so if you put paint on this, it will stay there and it will stay wet for a very long time. So you don't need to keep squeezing out paint onto one of these things.
Okay.
Then you've got these. These are the brushes that I've got for us. I know it looks a bit too much, but the only ones we're going to be worrying about today are an inking brush and a dry brush. That's going to be the basic techniques for today. So I'll base coat something, I'll have you base coat something, I will dry brush something, and I will have you dry brush something. And we will just keep going back and forth with these different techniques until I'm certain that you got it, all right?
Okie dokie.
Perfect, let's do it.
We start, of course, with the most basic of the basics, a direct wash of flesh-colored ink over this mud-brown base. This should tint the models just enough so that they get more of a red mud, or terracotta shade, more than an actual brown mud color.
So now that we've got our Terracotta Warriors inked and shaded, it's gonna be time to dry brush once they're done. But what a dry brush is it is a layer of color up from the base. So for a terracotta color, we won't be able to just dry brush it brown again, that would ruin the terracotta. So what I have to ask you is, since we don't have a terracotta shade in here, how would you mix a terracotta shade?
Terracotta's like a clay, right?
Yeah.
So that was almost a peach skin color when it dusts off, right?
Peach skin color when it dusts off, so we're gonna take some flesh tone then, according to you. Probably gonna mix it with a little bit of brown, yeah?
I think so.
All right. And since we shaded this down a little red, terracotta is basically our Home Depot window plant pots.
Okay.
I might be tempted to add just a little bit of red.
So I'm going to be honest, this was just as much of a lesson for me as it was for Mickey because of my natural color blindness. She actually had to mix the colors up, tell me which ones to put where, how much of each to put in, and then of course the dry brushing lessons actually began.
You've done your first layer of dry brush, but one layer of dry brush is never enough. It's constantly scaling up as you go along, and when you do that, you're going to be using less and less of the paint as you're going along.
By now, I'm sure you all have realized that the reason I chose these models to teach Mickey with is because you can just indiscriminately dry brush all over them, all the way up to the brightest color, without fear of messing up any other part of the model.
Okay, so you've done your first 2 layers of dry brushing. Fantastic. You've hit the areas all over the miniature to bring it back to a somewhat base. You've hit most of the areas that receive the most light. Now what we're going to do is an even drier dry brush of just the lightest possible color. And you're going to focus on hitting the areas like eyebrows, armor underside, folds in fabric, any sort of edges of things.
I used to hate it when my teachers made me paint up to the brightest color in the spectrum because I thought it made the model look too happy and bright. But it was part of my learning process, so it's part of Mickey's learning process too.
We've got our miniatures that look pretty good. We've got the basic clay appearance down, but When I look at the terracotta warriors that were buried with the Chinese emperors, I don't just see this clay color. There are other various smudges. There's oxidation, there's dust, there's mold, there's other colors that show up in this that could be replicated with paint. So let's take a moment, let's look at that, let's analyze the colors, and then let's come back and see what kind of effects we can put on these guys.
In our preliminary color research, we stumbled across the fact that the terracotta warriors in reality were actually once painted like we're painting miniatures. So that's where all those extra color smudges come from. Now, I don't know if anybody else does this, but usually when I paint, the way I paint and the colors I choose are either symbolically or historically significant in some way or another. I like to give the history nerds or the mysticism nerds or the mythology nerds in my audience and on the tabletop something extra and cool to look at. And this is one thing I didn't even have to teach Mickey. She just decided that we would be doing paint smudges and leftover bits of chipped paint on these statues all by herself. So she chose her colors to smudge all over the thing, and I chose mine. And together we're making a pair of terracotta warriors that look either freshly dug up or freshly vandalized, depending on how you look at it.
I know I said I'd just be teaching you to dry brush, but you wanted to make the face pop, and I think this might be a good way to do it.
I'm talking, of course, about fine detail highlighting with the thinnest brush and the brightest color. Mickey is a pen and ink artist by day, so I have every confidence in her fine motor skills here, and she knows exactly what areas to highlight without me really needing to tell her.
Yeah, please.
We're using glue. I'm excited. Sticky tacky glue.
Here we got our base.
Oh, what you got?
This is, it's
Gravel?
called Brown Battleground. So we just dunk him in here.
And just let him sit with it. Haha. He played into Sandbox.
Paint the base
Okay.
black.
Just for funsies?
Not just for funsies, but this is especially important on miniatures like this where the base rim color matches so closely with the miniature itself.
Got it.
You will notice almost instantly after you've blacked out the border how much the model pops.
Okay, so I've completed my model, but Mickey still has to go through the process of finishing the base on her miniature. So after the flocking and the base painting, which she did in reverse order to me, her model is complete, and I dare say without any shame, she had the better paint job on her terracotta warrior than I did.
I'm very proud of you. You've done well with what I've been teaching you so far.
Yay.
We're gonna do one last thing before we call it an end of this episode because it has something to do with dry brushing. It's just various metal techniques, and to do that, I'm gonna show you how to do that on these Adeptus Mechanicus First Edition Orc Stampas.
For those of you who have been with me long enough, yes, I am teaching Mickey my stereotypical Necron metal scheme. It involves dry brushing, so that just goes to show what a versatile technique it is. Once she's done that, it's on to the copper.
So the goal of this is to get the thing looking like an old penny. Now, in most copper oxide cases, the crevices of the metal look oxidized. In other words, copper oxide, it looks green. So you're going to take a base of green, and especially I'm going to do the shingles and the chimney as copper. We're dry brushing a little bit of copper over the green. See what's happening?
By now, Mickey is a dry brushing professional, and I have nothing to fear. She understands the concept of laying down the color of the crevices first, and then doing the high detail work afterwards with a dry brush. So not a whole lot of instruction was required from here on out.
We're going to do a little bit of rust work.
Oh, man.
Much like the copper, the rust work doesn't take much instruction for her. We lay down the base, we do the dry brush, and once again, she manages to get her rusty metal looking better than mine.
Only a few hours and a couple of headaches later, it looks like the results are in, and it turns out Mickey's actually a better painter than I am. She's well on her way to becoming an expert. How did you feel about it, though?
My head hurts, so I don't know whether to attribute that to trying really hard or just because my body feels like it. Being female is a little confusing like that sometimes.
Speaking of being female, next time we meet, we're going to be doing a special kind of episode about, some female models from the Warhammer line. Boy, that won't be controversial at all. Keep painting, guys, and we'll see you next time.
This was a test.